up our next speaker, Clancy.
Great talk, Ed.
I hope I didn't go over on you.
Yes, you went over. My name is Clancy Emerson, and I'm an alcoholic. I'm really pleased to be here. I really loved Liz's talk. I've sometimes, over the years, I've known Liz for many years, and over the years I've been despondent, and I've had sad days and lonely days and frightened days, and I think my sponsor once upon a time said, have a gratitude list. And I thought, what can I put on my gratitude list today? And I always able to put, at least I'm not Mr. Bailey. I'm really quite pleased to be here tonight. Over the years, I've been familiar with this dinner, and I've a couple times tried to get here and almost got here. And my friend Hal M. From Washington, who comes every year, has told me about it. And it looked as though I was never going to get here. And I really appreciate the committee asking me. Steve, apparently he sent a lot of letters to Liz. He never sent me any letters. But I want to thank Peggy B. and the committee and her special subcommittee that made it possible for me to be here. I'm so glad to see old friends of mine and new friends, Bob and Betsy, who I've known for many years in the World Service Office. And there's 3 or 4 guys from my home group in Los Angeles here tonight. And my granddaughter, who is here as an exchange student from the University of New Mexico, going to Hunter College and working at MTV. And I'm glad to see that she sees her grandfather cleaned up once. And a great many people. And we are here, and it's a touching moment, too, because I can't think of I've really been a little excited thinking about this evening. I do a lot of talking around here and there, and I don't get much excited anymore. I've been doing it for a lot of years. It's just something you do. But I remember I was excited in 1970, in January, when they asked me if I would come and talk at the International Convention in Miami Beach, and I was so thrilled to give a little talk at the convention where Bill gave his last talk. And I was thrilled to be asked to come to speak in Belfast and Dublin. And I was thrilled to be asked to come here tonight. I'll tell you, it makes no difference to much of you, but it's a monumental moment in my life, because I'm really, beneath my veneer of cynicism, I'm really a terrible sentimentalist. And I feel the chain coming down. I'm so glad that I'm sober and safe and sane, because I didn't used to be, and I may not be again someday, because that's the nature of the illness, but I am tonight. And we are all here, like Liz has talked about so well tonight, because we have been driven here under the lash. And I always had a great deal of difficulty with AA. I came to AA unsuccessfully year after year after year. And it always became very clear to me that what was offered here could not help people like me. Because it was obvious to me in my first few meetings of AA. AA is a place where people with alcohol problems go, and they get sober, and they clean up their act, and things get better. And I tried that, and I noticed that it doesn't happen to me, because my problem really isn't alcohol. My problems are much more complex. They are deep-seated feelings and emotions, and well, it's easy for you to laugh. You have no idea what it's like. But I spent my entire adult life fighting emotional traumas inside of me that I felt were unique unto me. And I've spent a lot of time over the years talking about them. But for tonight, to kind of make them succinct anyway, I suppose there are 3 general areas that I look over my life that have always been the most profound. One, and it's again nothing that I really felt that I could understand while I was going through it, but I can see it in retrospect. Much of the things you learn around here, you learn in retrospect. Many of the emotions I identify in myself, I have learned by listening to people's 5th step and saying, that's what that was that I've always felt. But one of the great emotions is that for some reason I could never understand, and I could not really put my finger on, it seemed as though people acted as though I was not quite enough, as though there was something missing with me. Nobody ever told me what it was, but it seemed that people seemed to instinctively like each other more than they liked me, that people got together more than they liked to get together with me, people that I was some sort of a second-rate guy. And nobody ever said in so many words, but I had that feeling all the time. And as a young man, I learned something that stood me in good stead. I felt you learn a series of little dog and pony shows and little acts and images to carry it off so that people don't understand that you're not quite enough. I remember going to college many years ago and learning about reading about defense mechanisms. I had never had any idea that's what my life was composed of, a series of defense mechanisms. And my particular one, because most of my life I was a writer, and certainly always an omnivorous reader, is my thing was like things like the imitation intellectual defense, where you say things like, what we've been arguing about, I don't suppose you have any idea what Nietzsche has to say about that, do you? I didn't think you did. And I thought I was the only one that used these things. It turned out everybody does, but I didn't know that. And there's a whole vast spectrum of them. And they all look different. You wouldn't even know they're the same. The other end of that spectrum is one that looks entirely different, but it's exactly the same thing. It's the guy with the Harley who says, I got a new Harley, and we're going to drive it up your ass. You know. What we're all saying is, stay at a distance and believe what I'm telling you. Don't see that I'm not enough. And that's a game I played all of my adult life. Another thing that I've spent much of my life with is that I've spent much of my life with fear. I never talked about it, but I always had it. Now I know everybody has fear. They say, I was really down and out and I got afraid. My fear was that funny fear, it seemed to me. It came when I started to get successful. I would work my buns off to get a good job again in a new town, a new place. And all it would take to start triggering that terror is someone criticizing me or implying I wasn't doing a good job. Or it looks to me like they were trying to undo me. And my natural reaction is to get him or get her before they get me. Now, looking back in retrospect, I suppose the reason for that was that I secretly felt I didn't deserve it either, and they had found me out. But I know that I hated it. I lived with that fear. Another feeling that I've had much of my life, nearly all of my life, is that somehow or other, I'm too vulnerable to feelings. Other people don't have the feeling. I just have a lot of feelings all the time. And I know people say, oh, don't worry, you can't do anything about the bullet with your name on it or the emotional arrow with your name on it. And that may be true, but I'll tell you, folks, on those streets out there, there's a lot of emotional arrows that are addressed to whom they may concern. And they seem to bounce off a lot of people, but my armor seems to be stuck open, just... And I'll tell you what that brings about. It's funny to talk about, but it isn't funny to live through. Always very, very vulnerable to rejection. I have always been able to see rejection where no one else can see it. Oh, he doesn't mean to put you down. Yes, he does, God damn it. And there's one other thing that I didn't identify until I was sober sometime, and I heard some boob talk about it in his inventory, and I thought, why didn't I think of that? And it's just this. Without even being aware of it, when you feel inadequate over a period of time, when you feel different, you're trying to compensate for it, it's so easy to slide into a frame of thought where without even being aware of it, it just looks as though everybody else can get by with being what they are. I'm the only one who has to keep playing roles and decide what role to play and what image to have to get along. Why can't I be like them and just be myself? But if I'm myself, it isn't enough. I got to have a gimmick. And so these and a lot of other emotions were things that really bothered me. When I was a young man, I wanted to always be successful. I wanted to get rid of these emotions. And I went to psychoanalysis in the early 1950s. Now, they say you shouldn't go to psychoanalysis, perhaps, but I loved it. I made breakthroughs that would bring tears rolling down your cheeks. I discovered where I hadn't got these emotions from. It just loved it. For example, I grew up in the Norwegian Lutheran Church in a little town called Eau Claire, Wisconsin. That was the biggest church there, a wonderful church, and I was a member of the majority, and kind of a strict church. They only really had two rules. You don't sin and you don't monkey with Catholics. You know, pretty much. And that seemed fair to me. But as I got older, I got weak, started sinning, and I got monkeying with Catholics. Then I got sinning with Catholics. I have practically refilled the Catholic Church in North America. And so I was going to hell, but I didn't blame the church. It's just I wanted a good time. And in psychoanalysis, I discovered that the Norwegian Lutheran Church in Eau Claire, Wisconsin, had psychologically scarred me. It had repressed me. Do you know how sad that is to find that out, that at a church you've always been nice to, and it turns out they've screwed you all along? If I knew then what I know now, I would have formed adult children of Norwegian Lutherans. Yeah. We could have hired a couple of codependents and sat around and been pissed off every week. Yeah. I discovered I'd been scarred by the Depression. I didn't even know there'd been a Depression. I discovered all sorts of things. I've often thought in recent years why I loved psychoanalysis so much. Because all I ever heard was bad news, and it took all my money, but I loved it. And I could never figure out why till the last 4 or 5 years when I have first at last been able to understand why, because I've seen other therapies do to people what I got out of psychoanalysis. To set this up, to tell you what it did for me, let me put it quickly. I've been around AA a long time, not as long as Liz, but this week was my 34th birthday, and I made me... Don't clap. Nope. We don't have time for that. Send me a check. I'll give it to my mortgage company in your name. But in my travels around AA, and I've sponsored people incessantly for a lot of years, and I've traveled around the world, and all the alcoholics I have known, there are two things that every alcoholic I have known has brought to AA. They may not always recognize them, they may not even identify them, but they're there sooner or later. One is a lack of self-worth. One is a deep-seated guilt. And the reason for this guilt varies from person to person, but it's always there. And these are the type of emotions you don't get rid of by talking or by reading or anything else. They require a lot of work in AA over a long period of time. Now, I'll tell you, I found a therapy in the 1950s. It probably didn't intend to do it, but it did something for me today that some therapies today offer to people with the same problem. What would you say if I could tell you there are ways to almost instantly get rid of guilt? There's a way to get rid of guilt, and it's used by many, many people today, and not putting it down at all. And that is to accept the role of victim. When it is their fault, it is no longer my fault. And that's kind of funny, except alcoholics like me die from it. And I see it. Because it gets down to this, no matter what I do, no matter what actions I take, I need do nothing about it, because that's the way I've been programmed. They did it to me. Their forces beyond my control did it to me. And victimization is really a delicious cloak to wallow in. There's only one problem for people like me. Maybe like some of you, I don't know. But for people like me, what it did for me, it brings about 3 attendant emotions. that you don't identify and don't understand. One, whether you intend to or not, you must sustain and enhance deep-seated feelings of resentment. You must resent those that have done it to you on a continuing basis. If you ever go to these meetings, well, it's really not funny at all. If you see people come out of these meetings that are based on victimization, nobody ever leaves those meetings smiling. They leave with deep further resentment. A second feeling that comes to people like me is that there's a continual reinforcement of the feeling of being different. I can't be like them because I have been made a victim and look what they've done to me. And the third one is a continuing feeling of self-pity. I could have been something. I could have been a contender, as they say. But they have ruined my life. And it's, just keep laughing, folks. I'm telling you, I've watched alcoholics die from these three emotions in the last 3 or 4 years. One a few months ago in our group hanged himself. He learned so much about how he'd been hurt. And the problem with these things, if you ever read that blue book called Alcoholics Anonymous, at least for people like me, it in there specifically states the 3 most lethal emotions for people such as me: resentment, self-pity, and feelings of difference. Victimization is an instant thing to take on that can choke and destroy me for the rest of my life. I stayed in that victimization for many years, and I had excellent arguments on how I'd been victimized by my father, by the church, by unfeeling people. And I drank and kept going and knew that it wasn't my fault. I later got into metaphysics, and I read metaphysical literature, and I did all sorts of things. But the biggest help I've ever had in my life was something that some people thought was a problem, but I never dreamed was a problem. When I was 15 years old, I was thinking tonight what Liz was saying. When she was 15 years old, she was a woman and half worn out. Well, not half worn, a third worn out. But at the age of 15 years old, I had never had a drink. And I had run away from home early in the Second World War. And on the deck of a ship in Pearl Harbor, some men intimidated me into taking a drink of whiskey I didn't want to take. And it made me throw up, and they laughed at me. So I kept trying to drink it the next few days till I finally held a drink down. And that day I discovered alcohol has the ability to almost instantly make me feel better, a lot. And so I began to drink. I didn't become a terrible old drunk. It was exciting to be 15 years old and then 16 years old and 17 years old in the Pacific Ocean and not know anything, being dumb as anything could be. At the end of the war, I was in a naval hospital up in Northern California, and they passed around some tests, and I didn't know what they were, but I just took one and changed my life because they gave me a high school diploma. So after the war, instead of having to go back to be a junior in high school in Eau Claire, Wisconsin, which I never would have done, I was able to go to college to Wisconsin after the war. And I went to college, and I got married. And I married a Catholic girl. I'd never seen a girl close up that had black hair before. Seemed exotic to me, I'll tell you. And I went out in the world, and I became a sports writer, and as I kept having more and more Catholic children, I said, we've got to do something about these children. She had a priest come by one day, and he gave me an hour and a half on the rhythm system, which is the Catholic version of birth control, and I listened intently, and I just couldn't pick up that beat. So I started my career as a national distributor of small Catholics. And as I got more children, I had to get better jobs. I got in public relations and advertising, and I became somewhat successful. And all this time I drank, and drinking was fine. The only problem I ever had with alcohol is that sometimes, because of my repressions, I have a tendency to drink too much. Or, as I like to think, many times I have been thoughtlessly overserved. And as a result, I found out that when I get drunk sometimes, I act bizarre. And I didn't know why that was till I realized when you've been repressed and alcohol relieves your chains, you go, wow, wow, wow. I never got a cop to buy it, but I liked it. And I drank too much and sometimes acted bizarre, and I was sent to my first AA meeting in 1949. That's a long time ago, folks. A lot of you little snots weren't even born. We love you. And AA, I thought it was nice, but there were, I was 22. Now, 22 doesn't sound very young today. But then no one in that area had heard of anybody within 15 years of it. They just thought I was some little freak. And I thought they were old, burned-out fools in their late 30s and 40s and gray-faced, pasty old goofs. And I felt sorry for them, actually. And that's why today, I've said this before in New York, I think, but I'm going to say it again because it can never be said too often. Sometimes we forget the young people in AA and what a role they play. Now, in my home group, many of you visited the Pacific group in West LA. I guess it's the biggest group in the world now, about 11 or 1,200 people every Wednesday night get in this massive synagogue, and we have a great synagogue. You hear that, Rabbi? And it really is great. And we have a lot of young people in that group. It's a very lively up group, a lot of young people. And there's a lot of young people here tonight. And I want to tell you, young people here tonight, if you are like the young people in our group, you must remember you are the AA leaders of tomorrow. And if you're like the young people in our group, I want to tell you, I am really glad I'm going to be dead. What a bunch of idiots. I don't mean anything personal by that. It's just my sponsor told me that 30 years ago, and he's glad he's dead, But I went to AA and I went to psychotherapy, did a lot of things. And I became somewhat successful. I did fairly well sometimes. And it just seemed always a funny series of coincidences as I look back over it. I'd do well and somehow an emotional explosion would make me, I'd get drunk or do something funny. Always not quite right. Always something happening. Always unforeseen event. Always something unfair. Always bad breaks. Always misunderstandings. Always something. Always meaning that sooner or later it always went. And the day finally came after years of going to AA, and years of going to psychoanalysis, and years of metaphysics, and years of reading. A day came that cannot happen to people like me with my background and intelligence and ability. I found myself being physically thrown out of a Skid Row mission in Los Angeles, and a guy saying, "And stay out of here." Funny, huh? Wait till I get to the part where I get leukemia. You'll like that. And I tried to explain to this guy, hey, I'm not a bum. 3 years ago, I was on the faculty of the University of Texas. Ads that I helped write, the L.C. Nelmer ads for the Borden Company, were running that very week in Life and Time and Collier's and Saturday Post. Some of you young people haven't ever heard of them, but they were so successful, the Borden Company's going to bring them back next year as part of their campaign. I've had my picture in the New York Times for achievement. How many people do you know have had their picture in the New York Times for achievement? But it's hard to explain these things in midair. And I stood outside of that Skid Row mission, my family gone, my home gone, my family had written me off in old clothes. My front teeth had been kicked out a few weeks before in the Phoenix drunk tank. You can get new homes and cars and families, but like our book says, we're like men who have lost their front teeth. We never grow new ones, or whatever the hell it says. There may be some people here who have lost their teeth due to drinking. Let me give you some hope. Once you become truly spiritual, they grow back. But I stood in the cold rain on 31st of October, 1958. And I'll tell you, if a guy would have come up to me and said, "Hey, kid, hey, Slim, your life depends on the answer. Are you an alcoholic? I would have had to truthfully say, no, I'm not, but I wish I were. I wish my life were that simple. I wish I could stop drinking and do nice things and get better. But there's something wrong, and I don't know what the hell it is. But I walked 71 blocks out to an AA club in the corner of Wilshire and Fairfax that I'd been asked to leave a week before for being in there drinking and fighting. And I hung around that club, and it was the worst type of milieu that any slipper can be in. It was full of AA fanatics. Just sickening kind of people say, I have no place to live and I have no money. I need a meal tonight. I don't know if you could let me have a few bucks. They'd give you answers like, go to a lot of meetings, work the steps, it all gets better. And I fell into the hands of a sponsor. There are different kinds of sponsors. Liz had a sponsor who never told her what to do, and Liz became a sober, wonderful lady. I had to have a sponsor who told me everything to do, because my natural rebellion, the same desperation that made me drink, eventually made me allow him to superimpose actions. And it was very difficult. It's very difficult when you're an imitation intellectual, because you got to prove that they are wrong, that this is nonsense. Give me the reason for it. And they say, never mind the reason. And I'd say to my sponsor, I was living in the back seat of an abandoned car back at the AA club. And I'd go to him, hey, Bob, I don't think you understand, Bob. It's a nice place for alcoholics, but it isn't enough for me. I have deep emotional conflicts that you can't understand. In my judgment, AA is not enough for me. And he would give me heartful, warm answers such as, in your judgment? Who cares about your goddamn judgment? You live in an abandoned car, for Christ's sake. I was just sick about it. But he loved me and intimidated me, and over a period of time make me, for the first time in all the time I'd been around AA, take actions that eventually turned out I was working the steps. And the first time I tried Alcoholics Anonymous, it worked. And it's worked ever since. But I had no idea that action really was the magic word. And that's, for some people like me, I have needed strong sponsorship. And he was my sponsor, and he died when I was a few years sober. And then I got another sponsor who was a great action man who never told me what to do, but showed me by his example, the most active man I ever knew. And he pulled me along in his wake, and I did everything I could to look good to him. And it's worked very well. So different people respond to different folks. And I finally got a little job as wrapping packages, and I finally got a little job in a medical corporation writing after I was sober a couple of years. Then I went to work every day, and I became director of advertising for that medical corporation. I was 5 years sober. Another guy and I were brought into, 7 years sober, and I was brought into Hollywood, and another guy and I created the #1 hard rock station in the world, and we all wore shiny suits and said things like, what's coming on down, baby? Something called Boss Radio. It really was a wonderful thing. I was 10 years sober. I was downtown doing public relations for the oil company. I was 15 years sober. I was a marketing director in Beverly Hills. When I was 5 years sober, the same wife and all those children had the crinkle of green in my wallet, all the way to a post office box in Dallas. Leaped out of their post office box, fled to my side. 9 months and 10 seconds later, another Catholic hit the street. Thank God somebody bought me a metronome. Yeah. And so I now live in Los Angeles with the same wife, and the kids are all grown up. My oldest daughter, that once my granddaughter's mother, she's now a DA in Albuquerque. And she comes home at Christmas, and when she was about 9 years old, she stammered so badly she could barely talk. That was a terrible curse to me, because the doctor said, you caused it. And she and now it's many years later, when she comes home at Christmas, I try to remember, what was it I did to bring that about? Jesus. She talks incessantly. If I could just get her to stammer once or twice, I could. But it's all very nice. It's a wonderful thing. It's another wonderful success. If there are any new people here, you will hear these stories till you're just ready to gag. And no matter, that's one of the sad things about AA. No matter how sad the speaker's talk is, you know that sooner or later, sometime before they're done, they're going to say, and then one day I walked through that door, and the desire to drink left me instantly. I now have $3 million with me tonight. Several different families have returned to me. And I owed all to one thing. I put the plug in the jug. And sometimes when you're sitting there just thinking, which cutting my wrists or hanging myself, it doesn't seem like quite enough. I think AA speakers would be listened to a lot more closely if every so often we had a speaker come in and say, and then it turned out, God damn it, I just couldn't make it. Because that's the way it is in the real world out there. But I just want to take a couple of minutes now for those of you. I'm not going to talk to you who are doing well because I'm sure you're wonderful. I want to talk to just about 5 minutes to those who are weak and heavy laden, as I have been many times in my life. And it's just this. The most important thing I said tonight, I said a long time ago, nobody paid any attention to. I said, my name is Clancy Imisland, and I'm an alcoholic. Now, how in the world could I be an alcoholic? Alcohol was not my number one problem when I drank. Alcohol was not my number one problem when I got sober. And it sure as hell hasn't been my number one problem in all these years. How can I be an alcoholic? I am so glad that I fell into the hands of activists, of people who were using Alcoholics Anonymous as it is, not the intermittent psychobabble that comes along every few years to diffuse it, but Alcoholics Anonymous. As I was saying at a sponsorship panel this afternoon, I have 3 kids in AA. And I am so glad they had AA to come to, that someone didn't tell them about faults or inner feelings. I'm not at all attacking other therapies, because as a member of AA, I have no judgment about them. But I don't want to go to AA meetings and hear about your inner child. I sure as hell don't. Any more than I would expect to go to an inner child meeting and have them make me take the 12 steps. 2 different organizations. If you don't want to go to AA, try AA. If you got a different way, go there. But this is the only thing that has ever worked for people like me, and I presume like you, and we can't afford to diffuse it on the basis of some counselor whose life themselves is rather screwed up, telling me not to do it this way. I don't judge. It is really getting to be a bad situation when you sit in an AA meeting and have to be apologetic because you're talking about Alcoholics Anonymous. To hell with that. Anyway, I don't mean to be contentious. I'm glad that I fell into the hands of people who made me take the steps, who take actions to do things, till I finally came to discover the most important single fact I have ever learned about in my life and the recovery from this illness. And it's just this. If you've heard nothing else I say tonight, listen to this sentence. If my problem is alcohol, I am not an alcoholic. And conversely, if I'm an alcoholic, my problem is not and cannot be alcohol. Now, doesn't that sound crazy and upside down? You say, that can't possibly be. Of course the problem is alcohol. I can disprove that in 10 seconds. If the problem is alcohol, detoxes turn out recovered people. They don't. Hospitals turn out recovered people. Treatment facilities turn out recovered people. Jails turn out recovered people. They don't. They turn out people who are physically sober and have varying amounts of information on what's wrong with them. But I'll guarantee you, if they be an alcoholic of my type, and I presume our type, as it says in the book, unless something dramatic happens after that, sooner or later they must always eventually drink or sedate. Well, if the problem isn't alcohol, what the hell is it? Something magic you're not telling us about? No. Something that you hear about at every meeting, that you read about every time you read the book. But if you are like me, your preconception of what you're hearing is so strong you don't hear what the hell they're saying. The problem is not alcohol. It is something called alcoholism. You say, well, it's the same thing. Alcoholism, that's just pedantry. That's sophistry. Not at all. Big difference. Big difference. If you be like me, I'll guarantee you the day will come when your life will depend on remembering the difference between these two things. And I could talk for a long time on it, but I'll tell you, put it in one sentence. An alcohol problem is overcome by stopping drinking and cleaning up your act. However, in this strange, denigrating, destructive, mind-destroying, eventually fatal thing called alcoholism, you will discover sooner or later, if you haven't discovered it yet, that stopping drinking and cleaning up your act has no long-term effect on your life other than to gradually make it so painful you can't stand it. Funny. That's why so many people, that's why with all the AA and all the help today, it is estimated something over 95% of alcoholics in America still die drunk. And maybe they die laughing about these things. I hope not. But they will eventually get... That's what makes alcoholism a fatal disease. The pain of sobriety eventually always gets worse than the remembered pain of drinking. It becomes the pain of sobriety against the relief of drinking. But even that doesn't make you an alcoholic. Something else must be present. You must be one of the 5 or 6 or 7% of people, and nobody knows why or how to this day, that alcohol has an unnatural effect on you. You don't know it's unnatural. The people around you don't know it's unnatural. They don't know anything about it. What is this unnatural effect? Makes you stay drunk? Nah. Despite what you hear at the podium, it is physically impossible for a human body to stay intoxicated 2 straight weeks, night and day, in the laboratory. Is that it makes you act crazy? Some people do. We have a lot of speakers with interesting stories. I'm in a different situation than most of you. Today in my work, I see alcoholics die regularly. And when I say I see them die, I don't mean I say that man is sick. I mean we say, put a blanket over his face and get him out of here. He's dead. And many of these people have never acted bizarrely once. They get more and more catatonic. You almost have to hold a mirror up to their mouth to see if they're breathing. Is it that alcoholics can't handle alcohol? No. Any test will indicate alcoholics can handle a given amount of alcohol better than a social drinker. Then what is it? The answer is so simple that I never would have guessed it in 10,000 years. Alcohol must have the unnatural ability to almost instantly make everything all right. Or as they say clinically, must have the ability to almost instantly alter my perception of reality, to change my relationship to my environment, to somehow make me taller and more self-contained, and them smaller and less threatening to me. And if it does that, I'll guarantee you, you will never have a better feeling. Sometimes around AA, I don't know why they do it, but people think it's some sort of modicum of being slick to get up and say, I'm an alcoholic and an addict or and something else, as though addicts were being something special. Addicts are a little different than we are. They are inducing the feeling we get on the natch. But I don't at all putting it down. But let me tell you this. I've been working with addicts for over 25 years. I know a little bit about narcotics. And I know about morphine usage or heroin usage where they get great euphoria, but very soon you can't get back there anymore. They overdose. Heroin addicts always overdose. They die from overdoses trying to get back to this euphoria. Cocaine, crack, all the stuff that gets you way up there. The omnipotence almost, the feeling. But it's a speed drug, and the side effects of speed kick in pretty soon. The paranoia, the restlessness, the discontent, the terrible addiction, the erosion of your body. But alcohol and an alcoholic puts you right where you are, feeling all together. And it's just great. There's only one thing wrong with it, is that eventually alcohol gets to be a problem too. And when alcohol begins to work, apparently, your ability to cope with reality diminishes because other people have to work their way through problems. I can change them. So the day must come when I have to stop drinking. And I try to stay sober. And I discover sobriety is more painful than drinking. So I eventually have to drink. But I can't stay drinking because I got to get sober. And I stay sober and I have to drink. That phenomenon is called alcoholism. And today, as I say, something over 95% of alcoholics in America still die from alcoholism. And I'm convinced most of them will die saying the same thing. But you don't understand. I am not really an alcoholic. My problems came when I was sober. I just drank for relief. And they have no idea. They've just defined the disease of alcoholism. And the reason that's so important, so that you'll begin to understand something I didn't understand till it almost killed me. That sitting in meetings and cleaning up your act and saying nice things will be very nice. But the purpose of Alcoholics Anonymous is not being sober. That is the doorway to Alcoholics Anonymous. But Alcoholics Anonymous is exactly the same thing that those guys set down many, many years ago. In 1935 in Akron, in 1938 in a book that was published in 1939, and following literature since then. It is after you are sober to somehow find it within you the ability to surrender to things that are sometimes frightening, sometimes dreadful. I know that guy means well, but he can't possibly know as much about my problems as I do. How could I trust him to make decisions about my life? But I must do it. To try these steps, they're all nice steps that kind of remind me of the things in church, but they can't work on problems like mine. But I have to let that man get me through those steps and take actions I never would have taken. To find ways to surrender on a continuing basis. Now, what is the purpose of all this? Is it to make you holy and good? Nope. It's a very slow process. I've come to the conclusion after many years, the function of Alcoholics Anonymous is to very slowly do what alcohol does fast. To very slowly take a guy like me, who has spent my life feeling less than, and today I feel like I'm enough most of the time. Not all the time, because it turns out no human beings feel like they're enough all the time. It takes a person like me who's lived with fear most of my life. And most of the time today, I am fearless. Not all the time, because I'm a human being. And human beings are afraid sometimes. It has taken a person like me who feels victimized, and through the actions of Alcoholics Anonymous, I do not feel victimized at all. I am responsible for my actions, and I have made amends to those who have victimized me, and we have lived in peace. It takes people like me who have always felt too vulnerable, and today, most of the time, I'm invulnerable. Not all the time, because I'm a human being. And that's why I keep active in Alcoholics Anonymous. I'm not here because I'm a wonderful person or a good person. I have found that's how I can maximize the feelings of being able to live in the world around me. And I don't know of a better way to do it. I have to be very careful even today to watch. There are alluring ways. The people, I came here not believing in God. I'm glad there wasn't a rational recovery. When I came here, I might have been there and not been here and might have died from it. I came to believe in a power greater than myself that I thought was my sponsor, and then AA, and then God. I came to understand I was an alcoholic. I came to understand there was a reason for my life, and today I live with some degree of dignity. There's just one thing I want to say before I sit down. I know there are some new people here. I don't give you the wrong impression. When I was 15 years sober, I was doing quite well. I was a marketing director in a publishing firm, and one day I did AA too long, I guess, because it pushed me into a different mood. And I found myself leaving a wonderful job in Beverly Hills. And for the last 18 years, I run the mission on Skid Row that threw me out in 1958. And people were saying to me, why do you want to give up your career and run this mission? Because it isn't a rehab house, nothing like that. It's really, we're dealing with dying people. And I tried to explain to him. I told that guy when he threw me out, I'll come back and get you, you son of a bitch. That I'm still looking for him. And I'm not a wonderful person. I'll tell you, I get up by the ocean out there, and I drive my car in the Santa Monica Freeway in the morning, and my car wants to get off at Robertson in Beverly Hills, and I have to fight the wheel. I want to get up to that office building where I can sit at my desk and pretty blondes in tight sweaters pour me coffee and say, "Is there anything else you'd like, Mr. Emerson?" "I'll see you later, my dear." And I can press buttons and make people jump. But instead I go downtown, and it's depressing. I see who died since, who I've worked with, or I've been working with trying to get off that street, and they're dead now. And who's overdosed, and who died in this alley, and who's drunk, and who's dead. And what am I doing here? But I go home at night, I get on the Santa Monica Freeway, and I always seem to be fuller than I ever was going down that elevator in Beverly Hills, popping my fingers in my shiny suit and being slick. So if you're new tonight, I want to tell you one thing. I don't want to give you the wrong impression. Even if you get a sponsor, even if you go to Alcoholics Anonymous, a lot of meetings, even if you take these steps, even if you work within the milieu of these traditions, we can't guarantee you that in 15 years you can have your own mission. You know. There's only so many go around. I got mine. Here's for you. But we can guarantee you that you can live with a degree of dignity most of the time that you never thought possible in a world that seemed to be full of pain and agony and misunderstandings and damage. I cannot tell you how happy I am to be a part of the chain. From that guy going west to Akron, Ohio, his sobriety hanging by a string, and get with a doctor whose sobriety hung by a string, to get to another guy in the hospital whose sobriety hung by a string. And today Alcoholics Anonymous is everywhere. And yet the battle is exactly the same as it was with Dr. Bob. To come to remember, you are not so different as you think. Take the actions. AA tonight in New York is exactly what it was in Akron in 1935. One alcoholic talking to another alcoholic to help him reduce his feelings of difference at least enough so that he will begin to take actions he does not yet believe in, and to little by little alter the perception of the world. I am pleased beyond measure to be with you tonight, to be with Liz, to be with the committee, with my friends from Pittsburgh, my friends from around the country. But I am more pleased to be here and say, happy birthday, Bill. Thanks a lot.